smooth criminal. Yes, I am smooth. That's me, so smooth. I'm your guilt, your anger, your jealousy, your greed, whatever negative emotion you need. Oh, take that, Dr. Seuss. R.I.P. Now, don't hate me too much. I'm actually a part of you. Just like that ill-advised breakfast burrito from college that you're pretty sure is hanging around in there. I'm always with you. Doesn't that bring you comfort? And at times, indigestion? Boom! Nailed the metaphor. In all seriousness, I'm in your head. And I'm not going anywhere. And honestly, I have you to thank for that. You've provided me a wonderful home. Okay, this place is a dumpster fire, but I'm kind of getting used to it. So let's get comfortable. Let's braid some hair and swap some war stories. Because you and me, I think we're gonna be together a long time.
Well, I am just really excited for the kickoff of this brand new series, and especially if you're new to CCV, I'm so glad you're here. This series, a lot of it's going to be based on a book I read years ago called It Came From Within. But to kind of set up just where we'll be headed for the next few weeks, I want to ask you a question. I want to ask you to raise your hand if this happened to you on all of our campuses. And don't be ashamed, this happened to me as well, all right? How many of you, growing up as a child, one of your parents washed your mouth out with soap? Anybody out there? Wow, we had some terrible kids, all right? This happened to me as well. It happened when I was really young, around the age of 7. I learned my first cuss word, all right? And I knew I wasn't supposed to say it, but I still can picture exactly where I was at. I was playing in the backyard with my brother. We were playing wiffle ball with a bunch of friends from the neighborhood, and my brother made me so mad. I mean, just in a fit of rage, and I don't know why I did it this way. I think I thought this would not get me in trouble. I walked up to my brother, and I didn't shout it out to him. I literally just went up and I whispered it in his ear. And you know what my brother did? What every sibling does, right? He went and ratted me out to my mom, all right? So I grew up with this amazing godly mom, and so she politely came out and politely invited me to come in the house. And so, I went in the house, and she took me to the bathroom, and I thought I was getting a spanking, and she just very calmly took a bar of soap, sudded it all up, and I had no idea what was about ready to happen. I've never seen this before in my life. She opens my mouth, and literally just a bar of soap, she's rubbing it all in my mouth, like all over. You been there? Some of you are having flashbacks. I can still taste the soap. That's how traumatic as this was for me. And in all honesty, I never said that cuss word the whole rest of my childhood. I say it all the time now, but I didn't. I'm joking. I don't. Okay, but see, I learned what almost all of us learned. Okay, and that's this: that hey, it only takes so many times getting your mouth washed out with soap. It only takes so many spankings, so many groundings, so many times that someone took something away that you love because you messed up, before you just realize that if I don't start filtering my behavior, there's gonna be some steep consequences. So we get really good at this, because think about this, even all growing up, it's not like I didn't think that word sometimes, it's not like I didn't think bad thoughts or wanna punch someone in the face, but I just realized, gosh, I gotta filter this stuff out. And you better believe we take this skill we develop and we bring it with us into our adult life as well. I mean, we're good at this. I mean, think about your workplace right now. So many of us, we filter all these negative emotions, all these things that we know could really cause some harm. You're that anger outburst, you want to just blow up on that colleague and be like, you're a moron, and you just want to say it to him, but you filter it out because hey, enough outbursts, you're not going to get the promotion, you're not going to get the raise, hey, you could even get fired. But it's not just work, right? We begin to develop a very sophisticated filter in relationships as well. Think about going on a first date. Yeah, your filter is so high. I mean, you are like the best, right? And why do you filter so hard on a first date? So you can get a second date, and a third date, and a fifth date. Some of you have been on a fifth date, and here's exactly what you thought. this is not the same person I went on a first date with. The person didn't change. You know what changed? The filter they used began to wear down a little bit. Now, before we before we start thinking about everybody else, let's be honest. Every single one of us does this. Every single one of us does this. And, for example, the best you've ever looked in your life is either on a first date or in a job interview. We know this. Let's get even more real. Let me talk to the husbands for a second. A lot of us husbands, we filter so much around our wife because we know if we don't filter a lot, she's probably not going to want to do what every husband loves to do. Do you know what I'm talking about? Watch ESPN. Okay, that's what I'm talking. What'd you think I meant? My goodness. No, but here's the whole point, okay? Here's the whole point. Listen. We become experts at monitoring and filtering our behavior. We become experts at it. Here's the problem we all have to realize. Eventually, monitoring and filtering your behavior is a terrible strategy. And here's why. Every single filter breaks down. I mean, look at your own life. The air filter you put in your house, that thing breaks down eventually. You forgot all about it. It's pumping dirt all in your house, and you're just like, when did we change that? Oh, my goodness. You have filters on your water. You may have water filtration systems, filters all in your car for your oil in your cabin. And every single filter eventually breaks down, and when it breaks down, the dirt that it was meant to keep out, eventually it just kind of comes through. So in our own lives, every single one of us has had this experience. We develop these filters on our behavior. It's like we have these filters, and we're trying to keep all this negative stuff from coming through, and eventually we have a breakdown, a slip, if you would call it, and something pops through, and we go, whoa, where'd that come from? It's because your filter broke down. Now, a lot of us, and this is the sad part, when does our filter kind of slip and break down and things pop through? What environment does that happen the most? You know what's sad? And this is for me too. Our filters break down the most around the people we love the most. I mean, you can be a saint at work, and you can be at your worst around your family. I've been there. Some of you'd say this, no, that's actually not me. I keep that filter hard and strong publicly all the time. But you know when your filter breaks down? When you're all alone. And if someone had a camera that was filming your life on the things that you think about, the things you watch, the things you do when you're all alone, that filter breaks through, you'd be horrified for other people to know. And we just make excuses. We come up with all these great excuses. Like the filter breaks down, we go, whoa, where'd that come from? And here's the things we say to ourselves, right? We say something like this: I can't believe I just did that. I mean, that's not like me. Or we say this: I can't believe I just said that. Ooh, how'd that come out? I don't even know where that came from. Or I can't believe that came out of me. That's not who I normally am. But what if? I mean, and so when we say these things, it's like we do something like this. We go, ooh, I'm just going to have to work on this filter. We just go back to working on the filter even more and more and more. But what if all this behavior filtering we get in the process of, what if it's a terrible strategy? What if it's the worst strategy? What if in the midst of trying to filter out all this stuff going on inside of us, all these negative emotions, all these negative thinking, all this negative behavior, what if trying to filter it all, we mask something deeper going on inside our lives? And just like a smooth criminal, as we mask it, this thing's working and growing, and it will destroy everything good in our lives. Well, Jesus himself weighed in pretty heavily on this topic. And he weighs in on it in the book of Matthew chapter 15. And I want to encourage you this week, go read the whole entire chapter of Matthew chapter 15. It's really, really good. I'm going to key in on one single verse, one thing Jesus said that just rocks your world on this topic, okay? And I probably read this verse 100 times. And when I finally saw what Jesus really, really meant, I'm just telling you, it is staggering. As a matter of fact, the first time I really saw it, I wanted to push back you might want to push back as well. So let me set the scene before I read you the verse. Matthew chapter 15 is a chapter where Jesus is going to deal with some issues going on with the religious leaders of his day, okay? Because if there was any group that had learned to filter their behavior, it was the religious elite that were around Jesus. As a matter of fact, what they did, the religious elite, they added rules upon rules upon rules upon rules so that they always looked amazing to everyone around them. I mean, but what Jesus knew is he knew this. Hey, you get those guys behind closed doors or in a setting where they're not around a bunch of people, their filters come down and they struggle with all the same behaviors as everybody else. But they were experts at filtering their behavior, much like many of us are, myself included. And so into this environment, Jesus says something. He says this. He's going to tell us, you're filtering the wrong thing. Listen to what Jesus says. Matthew chapter 15, verse 18. This is the verse. Here's what he says. But the things that come out of the mouth come from what? The heart. Now here's what Jesus is saying. You have to realize this. He's saying all those things. Oh, where did that come from? That's not me. I didn't even know where that came from. Jesus would say, I do. That came from your heart. No, Jesus. You don't understand. I have a really, really good heart. That was just a little slip and it just kind of came out, but I have a great heart. He'd say, well, I know you think that, but that's just because you've developed this really sophisticated filtering and you filter everything. And you say, no, well, I'm not normally like that. Yeah, I know, because you filter everything and something breaks through the filter. And Jesus is saying that's an indication of what's in your heart, which is pretty tough to swallow for a lot of us, because what Jesus is saying is he's saying those things that come out, they're not the exception. They're actually a reflection of something going on inside of your heart. It's not tough to accept. And then in the very next verse, Jesus even clarifies it even more. He says this in verse 19. For out of the heart come evil thoughts. And this is where we want to help Jesus. Jesus, evil thoughts don't come out of my heart. Thoughts come out of where? My mind. It's like, I'm going to help you out a little bit, Jesus. Okay, I know you lived 2,000 years ago. There probably weren't a bunch of like brain scientists back then and scientists that knew a lot about the brain and neurons and neurotransmitters. But Jesus, evil thoughts don't come from the heart. They come from my mind. Jesus is going to say, I know you think that. I know you've maybe even been told that. Nope, they come from the heart. What? Think about in your own life how different that is from maybe everything you've been taught. Let me give you an example. When you were a child and you did something really, really dumb, I mean, it was way out of bounds behavior-wise, what did your parents say to you? What my parents said to me? Guess, I'll let you guess. What were you thinking? Your parents ever say that to you? Anybody's parents ever like knock on their head? Hello? Anybody inside in there? And so the implication's this: think harder. I think I've said that to my kids. Like, what were you thinking? And it's almost like we're implying to them, just think harder, just filter more. Oh, that's right, it was just a little slip. I'll think better next time. Here's what Jesus is trying to tell us, okay? And this is so hard. He's saying, no. All those things don't come from your mind. They actually come from something that's gotten lodged in your heart. You have a heart problem. No, Jesus, when I grew up, my mama told me I have a good heart. Well, your mama's sweet, but your mom's wrong. Okay, that's what Jesus is going to say. You don't have a sweet heart. You got an evil. There's something going on inside your heart. Listen to how clear this is in Jeremiah chapter 17. I mean, think about this. Jeremiah 17:9 says this. The heart is what? It's deceitful above all things. He goes on to say, who can understand it? In other words, you're going to be deceived and tempted at some point to say this. When that thing filters through, where'd that come from? Oh, no big deal. That's nothing to look for here. Nothing in my heart, just a little slip. You're going to deceive yourself. And Jesus is saying it comes from the heart. In other words, and this is hard to accept, but some of you need to write this down. That slip in behavior isn't an exception. It's a reflection of what's in your heart. It's not an exception. Ooh, it's a reflection. It's a clue to something that's gotten into your heart. And here's what Jesus is saying very clearly if you're taking notes. Every behavior stems from the heart. Did you know, up until 20 years ago, every single scientist would have absolutely disagreed with what Jesus said? Until 20 years ago, when now science is now confirming exactly what Jesus said. I'm going to read you some groundbreaking research. I'm going to read you an excerpt from some groundbreaking research on the dynamic between our heart and our brains. Now, this is not a Christian study. This comes from the Huffington Post, a major newspaper, dated February 2013. Groundbreaking research, and I'm just going to read it for you because I want to tell you exactly what it says. Here's what it says. A bunch of doctors wrote this. A bunch of scientists wrote this. Quote, until the 1990s, scientists assumed, and most of us were taught, that it was only the brain that sent information to the heart. But now we know it works both ways. End of quote. In other words, and they go on to say this, we know that the brain, we have always known scientifically that the brain controls some things, like, for example, it controls some of the rhythms of the heart. But they go on to say this, now we've discovered the heart actually controls the brain. So they go on and they say this, I quote, the heart is an intricate network of several types of neurons, neurotransmitters, proteins, and support cells, just like those found in the brain proper. And they go on to call the heart now a new brain. They call it the heart brain. That's their term, not mine. What I'm going to say next, I think, is the most significant part of this whole study I read. In terms of heart-brain communication, it is generally well known that there's a descending communication from the brain to the heart. However, it is less appreciated that the majority of fibers, the majority of connections between the heart and the brain are ascending in nature. Do you understand what that means? The majority of connections between the heart and the brain are all headed this way, not this way. And now I'm going to tell you the most significant quote. I'm going to put it on the screen so you can just see it. This is a quote from doctors. This means the heart sends more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. Is it not unbelievable that now within the last 20 years, science has proved exactly what Jesus said 2,000 years ago? That should give us extreme confidence in this book, because some of you doubt it. Some of you wonder, I don't know. It's amazing when science backs up exactly what Jesus said. In other words, this should be a huge aha moment for some of us today. Let me just visualize it for you. We were taught growing up, and the assumption by every scientist until the last 20 years was this, that all our words, all our behaviors, it came from where? Our mind. That's what it all flowed from. Now we know what Jesus said is exactly true, that our heart is the primary place that controls all of our behaviors. Is that not unbelievable? I mean, I was eating, I read too much on this last week. I feel like I could be a brain surgeon. I don't know. I'm joking. But you can go read it for yourself. And this is why, over almost 3,000 years ago, the wisest man on earth who's ever lived, the scripture tells us, a man named Solomon, wrote this in Proverbs chapter 4. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, Solomon said this, above all else, hey, I know I wrote all of Ecclesiastes, I wrote most of Proverbs, I said some of the wisest things anyone's ever said, and if you forget everything else I wrote, above everything else, I want you to remember this thing. You ready? Say it out loud. Guard your heart. Above everything else, guard your heart. Why, Solomon? I thought I was supposed to guard my mind and thinking and filter all my behaviors. No, you guard your heart. Why? For everything you do flows from it. Every single thing you do, it flows from your heart. And I highlighted this term right here. Everything you do flows. It's one Hebrew word that means the source, where it came from. Everything flows from the heart. Here's the problem we have to deal with. We were taught growing up to guard our behavior. All of us were. It's what we guarded. It's what we filtered. And Jesus is saying, no, Jesus teaches us to guard our heart, which means we have to shift from behavior modification to heart transformation. Let me say that again. We have to shift from behavior modification, which never ever works, to beginning to allow God to transform our hearts. You know why I think this is so hard to do? You know why I think it's so hard to begin to focus on maybe what's going on in our heart? Let me put it this way. What's easier for you to say when you have a whoops, don't know where that came from, outburst of anger, outburst of jealousy, temper flare, blow up? What's easier to say? I just made an uncharacteristic mistake. This isn't me. Or, I might have something wrong with my heart. I mean, think about what parents say about their kids. I mean, I think I've said this about my kids. I know they really messed up, but they have a good heart. Hey, I know Jimmy punched your son in the face, but Jimmy has a good heart. No, Jimmy's got an evil heart. There's something really bad going in there. You got to deal with it. I mean, it's so easy to talk about other people, isn't it? But I'm going to make this really, really personal to me, okay? When stuff happens in my life and I have one of those, where'd that come from? I do not want to admit something might be wrong with my heart. When my temper flares at my kids, I don't want to say Ashley has something wrong with his heart. When I have an anger outburst at my wife, that I'd be ashamed if you knew about it. I don't want to say, maybe there's something wrong. I've got something lodged in my heart. No, I want to just make excuses and say, It's so hard to begin to admit. And you know what? I think that's exactly Satan's plan. See, he does not want us to admit that something maybe is going on in our hearts. He wants us to go, that little outburst, don't worry about it. That's not you. Don't even pay attention to it. Just move on. And all the while, like a smooth criminal, he's behind the scenes in your heart, grabbing hold, pulling, and he's beginning to destroy everything that matters in your life. What if Jesus was right? What if every single thing, those outbursts, those behaviors, what if every single thing stems from something going on in your heart? Let me take it a step further. What if every vice and every issue you're dealing with in your life right now, the alcohol that you go too far on and you know it, the substance that you struggle with, the sex that you just are continually just reaching for something more, the pornography, the greed, the insatiable desire for more, what if it all stemmed back to something that's gotten lodged in your heart? Now listen, this is just the introductory week. And what we're going to do for the next 4 weeks is we are going to dive into 4 things that have a tendency to get lodged in every single one of our hearts. That if we don't deal with them, they will destroy everything that's good in your life. The amazing news is this. For every single thing that has a tendency to get lodged in your heart, that anger, that jealousy, those outbursts. We are given one specific thing in Scripture that can slay the enemies in our heart, that can pull out anything that would look to destroy you. We're given them in Scripture, and that's what we're going to look at. Do you want to know what those 4 things and what the 4 remedies are? You got to come back next week. Because we're going to start right in next week looking at the very first smooth criminal, all right? But let me just say this. This is a big series for some of us. The last few years, I've had a few friends that have actually had heart attacks. Now, luckily, they survived these heart attacks, and I'm so grateful for that. But you know what each of these friends has told me? There were so many warning signs leading up to that I just ignored. I mean, they said even like the day of, there were warning signs that I just said, no big deal. Not going to pay attention to that. And they almost lost their life because of it. And every day, all day, people lose their lives because they ignore the warning signs in their life that they might have a heart problem. But what about those things that get lodged in our heart? What do we do with those? Jesus has some very specific things to say. And for some of us, all those warning signs we've been ignoring all these years, what's at stake in your life, if you don't deal with them, is more than a minor heart attack. See, what's on the line for some of us in the next 4 weeks of dealing with some of these hard issues is a marriage. You may not have a marriage 5 years from now. Hey, you may not have a marriage 6 months from now if you don't deal with some of the issues and heart problems that are going on right now that you've been ignoring for so long. For some of you, what's at stake is your family. Some of you have a little child at home right now, and they do not know why mom or dad is so angry all the time. Some of you, what's at stake is a teenager. And you have a teen right now who's wondering, when I finally leave home, I'm not sure I ever want to come back. Others of you, what's at stake is you just being able to look at yourself in the mirror and liking what you see and accepting who you are. It's such a struggle for you. Others of you, you have a big dream for your life. I mean, you have big dreams. And you keep hitting wall after wall after wall after wall. And you've made all these excuses in your life. And the issue is something is in and lodged in your heart. And if you don't deal with it, it is going to destroy and keep making you bump up against wall after wall after wall. This series is going to transform some of your lives. And I'm going to challenge you not to miss 1 week, not 1 week for the next 4 weeks. Because listen to what David said in Psalms. A man after God's own heart, David said this. He said, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit in me." Do you know why David wrote those words? Because he knew God could give him a clean heart and renew a new heart in him. Listen, Jesus did not come to give you a better filter in your life. Jesus came to give you a new heart, and Jesus came to transform your heart over and over again from these things that can get lodged in our heart. So before we dive in next week, I'm going to give you a very specific takeaway today, all right? And here's the takeaway. It's going to seem a little odd to some of you. This week, I want you to develop a new habit. Listen, we go throughout our weeks, we monitor everything. Some of you monitor every step. Some of you monitor your calories. Some of you monitor, all these things, your mileage. You monitor your health. You monitor your workouts. This week, I'm going to challenge you to start monitoring your heart. Here's the problem. We haven't been trained to do that. We grew up trained to just guard our behaviors, filter our behaviors. I want you to develop a skill set to begin to monitor and guard your heart. And here's what I'm gonna tell you to do. This whole week, I'm gonna ask you to do this. Every single time you have one of those outbursts, anger, blow up, jealousy, where are those thoughts coming from? I want you to just begin to log, write it down. Write it on your phone right there. Just put a little note in your phone and begin to ask yourself, could there be something going on in my heart? And you know what your temptation is going to be? Because it's my temptation as well. What you'll want to log is you'll want to log somebody else's name. We just blame everybody else. Well, it's their fault. Well, look what they did in my past. I mean, look what I have to hold on. You know, we have all these, and I get it. Okay, if we brought you on stage and we allowed you to share your story of how they hurt you, we'd sob with you. But how long are you going to let somebody else own and control your behavior? How long are you going to let somebody else affect your heart and destroy everybody that you love around you? You have to begin to ask a deeper question and go deeper and say, what is this thing going on in my heart? Let me talk to you men for a second. Here's what some of your men are thinking. That sounds a little soft. This is anything but soft. Listen, men, the strongest man in the world is the man who admits and understands some of the weaknesses, some of the things going on in their heart, and he deals with them. That's what real men do. Real men do not skate responsibility and blame it on somebody else. Now, ladies, you have the same issue, okay? You don't just complain about it to everyone else. We begin to look deeper about what's going on in our hearts. So I'm just gonna challenge you this week. You begin to look at and monitor your heart. Now, when I read this book years ago, the author, an amazing author, an amazing pastor, he did an exercise with his kids that I just began to emulate and do with my kids. And here's what I did with our kids growing up, and you could ask them. We did this all the time. We still do it to this day. Tucking in my kids at night, I would simply just put my hand on their heart, and I would just begin to ask a question. How's your heart? How's your heart? And then I would ask them a series of questions that began some of the most transformative conversations we've ever had between parents and child, okay? So here's what I'm gonna do today. I'm gonna get you to practice looking and monitoring and examining your heart, because this is not something we were taught to do, all right? So here's what I want to do. Every campus, every person, I just want you right now to just close your eyes. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Every eye closed. How's your heart? Did you have an angry outburst this past week? Do you have an angry outburst today? Who are you mad at? What drove that anger? Did somebody take something from you? Have you named it? What'd they take? Do you feel someone owes you something? What could they do to repay it, even if they could? Is there something in your past that you feel guilty about? Have you told anybody about it? Are you worried? Are you anxious? About what? Father, I want to pray right now for every individual that's beginning to just dive a little bit deeper into their heart. I want to pray for myself. I know putting this message together was it was convicting for me, Father, to just look in my own heart and say, what's going on? What's in there? What's got lodged? And so today, Father, I just pray as we go about this week that we would begin to monitor our hearts, to dig a little bit deeper versus just trying to filter our behavior, which we know doesn't work. We know that filter comes off. And some of us are destroying the people around us because we've just tried to filter our behavior versus looking deeper into our hearts. And as we do this, God, I want to pray that you and your Spirit begin to move in every heart. I want to pray right now for people that have never even turned their hearts over to you. They never even decided to follow you. Well, that's step one. For those of us that have decided to give you our hearts, we thought, well, that was it. Well, no. We have to continue to monitor and strip out of our hearts anything that's not there from you. And so as we go through this series, God, I pray that you move in our church. I pray that you restore some marriages. I pray you restore some families. I pray you reinvigorate some dreams that people have, well, they've just put them on the shelf because they keep hitting the same wall over and over again. I pray you move. And as you do, God, we look forward expectantly to what you want to do as we begin to transform our hearts through your power and your Spirit. We pray this in Jesus' name, amen. Hey, next week, we are diving into the very first Smooth Criminal. This week, do not just guard your behavior. Go out, guard your heart. We'll see you then, everybody. See ya.